Hello friends, welcome back to another episode. And in this episode I wanted to talk a little bit about bitterness. So I am involved with a local book study or a discussion group, and at the moment we're talking about The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. And if you've never read that book before, I highly recommend it. It's a pretty easy read, but there's so much depth and there are so many things to think about with what C.S. Lewis is saying and all of the material that he's covering. So if you've never read the book before, it deals with souls that are attempting to enter heaven. So they're kind of coming from hell or purgatory, and it kind of deals with that introductory phase where these souls are getting off of the bus, so to speak, and the impediments that some have that prevent them from entering, and the choices that some make to forego evil and the wrong that they've done to enter into eternal happiness. It's a great book. And in one chapter, the narrator meets a character who is simply referred to as the hard-bitten man. This man is older, and he's described as being educated but speaking in a gruff way, and the narrator notes that that's something that has always led him to implicitly trust the speaker. As the conversation progresses, the hard-bitten man is revealed to be an immensely bitter person. He's traveled all over the world. He's traveled to Beijing, to Niagara Falls, the Taj Mahal, and he finds them all uninteresting. He claims that they're all just tourist traps led by the same type of people. He then goes on to say that even hell itself is disappointing. He said that it was, cracked up to be this place where there's people being roasted on grills and devils with horns, but ultimately it's just like any other town. And then even heaven is more of the same. It's just bland and unappealing and just not really anything that he's interested in. One of the people in the discussion group had asked, how do we avoid that bitterness and becoming jaded? And I think that that's a great question. I know that for me personally, I kind of have a melancholic personality and I have a tendency towards cynicism. And I know that there have been times where I've been a slave to bitterness, but I hadn't really given the topic much thought, honestly. And I kind of wanted to cover those thoughts that I had here, though, because I think in today's world, bitterness and cynicism, I think that they're easier than ever. In a certain sense, I would almost argue that they're kind of in vogue and fashionable. It's fashionable to kind of strip away a lot of these great things that we have around us and to be sort of dismissive almost, like things aren't really that great, that there are all these other problems. And indeed, maybe there are problems, but I think it's important to be aware of the fact that it's easy to fall into those traps of cynicism and bitterness. And I think it's important to think about how to avoid that in the first place and to shake it off once we've gotten stuck. Because this isn't really the mark of the Christian. Christians are called to be joyful and to rejoice in the Lord and to have a joy that's unshakable even in the midst of darkness and even in the midst of when we see things that are terrible or troubling. As I was thinking about bitterness, I think that it really tends to stem from either one of two things. Either ingratitude, we're not really counting our blessings, we're not really thinking about how fortunate we are for the things that we do have, or we're looking too much inward. We're only focused on our current situation and our problems and the mean thing that somebody said to us or the injustice of something that somebody did to us. I think that both of those really kind of form the basis for how we sort of become bitter. Either we don't have that gratitude to view things as really what we have as being very good and not something that we've necessarily even earned, or looking inward too much. And I've noticed that I've really become bitter in three ways over the course of my life. In situations where I can't or I won't talk to friends or the parties involved to kind of bring my thoughts out into the light, to get an alternate perspective, to sort of talk things out and get them out of my own head. I think that when that happens, when I was saying we look inward too much, I think that this can really happen when we don't talk to either friends or family or people that are involved in the situation that we might find ourselves becoming bitter about. we start to look inward and we start to get stuck in patterns of thought because we're not putting anything out into the world. It's all just sort of stuck in our head, and it's really easy to get stuck into a groove in that sort of situation. It's very easy to start to get into sort of like a cyclic pattern of thought where we start to say, oh, well, this thing happened, it was this person's fault, I'm angry. This thing happened, it was this person's fault, I'm angry, and it just sort of feeds into itself. And it starts to let things fester a little bit. When we don't bring it out into the light and we don't bring it out for other people to kind of help us through, and we don't accept the help of others, at that point our problems just sort of devolve and can kind of morph into this thing that really is just ultimately bitter. It doesn't make any progression, it doesn't heal, but rather it just sort of festers. The second spot where I've noticed that I become bitter is where I'm deceiving myself. And you might notice, or you might wonder what I mean when I say deceiving myself, because that can sound kind of bad or kind of ambiguous as to what I mean there. And what I mean is either there are thoughts that I'll have that I don't want to have. I'll get angry about something and then I'll say, oh no, I can't actually feel that way. I can't actually think that way because only bad people think that way. Or where I'm just not honest with what I'm feeling. I've noticed plenty of situations where I'll start to write something in my journal and then I'll be like, oh wait, I can't actually write that because that's bad. And it's like, well, maybe that's bad, but ultimately it's what I'm thinking, it's what I'm feeling. And I think if we can have the confidence to bring out those real thoughts, those sort of raw emotions, I think that we can make a lot more progress and avoid bitterness, because at that point we can actually work on what's bothering us. We can work on what ails us. If we go into the doctor's office and we never say, this is what's bothering me, I have this weird fungus and it's embarrassing and I don't want to tell the doctor about that. Well, the doctor's not going to be able to really help you. I mean, at best, you might start chasing after some of the symptoms, but you might not ever actually get to the root cause and heal it. And I mean, if you do, great, but that's mostly by blind luck at that point. So that self-deception is something that I think is important to realize. And I think it's very easy in today's day and age because we view media streams 24/7 that are only presenting certain parts of stories. We view entertainment on TV and through YouTube or wherever that's presenting a certain agenda. And I think deep down we know that there's more to the story, but we kind of accept it because it fits our ideology or it fits who we think we want to be, or it fits that specific narrative that we want to follow. But I think ultimately, if we can avoid that self-deception, we've gone a long way in avoiding that feeling of bitterness and that feeling of helplessness or ingratitude. The third time where I've noticed that I've felt bitter in my life has to do with the loss of agency. And when I say loss of agency, what I mean is, in today's day and age, I work with computers. That's my job. And when I think about the way that people worked 50, 100, 150 years ago, work was much more involved with doing things with the soil, doing things with your hands, repairing things. It was very physical kind of work, and it was very easy to see what your labor did, by and large. You couldn't really get away from it. But in today's day and age, our work is very abstract. And a lot of the things that we work with, computers, phones, just higher technology stuff, is so far beyond what we actually understand and what we know concretely. Our entire life is a little bit more abstract. And I think that in general contributes to this feeling of loss of agency. It's not as obvious what I do in the world. It's not as obvious what my place in the world is, what value I really bring to the table. And I think that that's something that can lead to a really sort of insidious sense of bitterness, because it's almost connected with what I do day in and day out in the world. It's almost so deeply rooted in a lack of understanding of how I contribute to the world, what my work does, how I am able to influence the world around me. I think that in the same way, when it comes to social media or Netflix or something like that, our entertainment has been privatized and atomized to a certain degree. A lot of people wouldn't even have to leave their house nowadays. And especially in the light of the pandemic and everything, a lot of people didn't leave their house for weeks, months on end. And I think with that, it really becomes difficult to see our place in the world. And like I said, how our human efforts, our interests, our desires and drives impact the world. And I think when you don't have that sense of agency, that sense of understanding of who you are, where you fit in the world, it's very easy to become bitter at that point, because ultimately, even if it's subconscious, that feeling of why am I here? What am I doing? Really has an opportunity to take root and set in at that point. So these are the times that I've noticed that I've felt bitter. I'm sure that there are others that you have felt before as well, so feel free to leave those in the comments or reach out. I'd be curious to hear what else your guys' thoughts are on that. But what can we do about bitterness? How do we avoid it in the first place? And how can we get out of a rut if we get stuck in there? I think that the obvious answer, that may not be the easiest answer and might be the most overlooked answer, is to bring it to prayer. And I know that bring it to prayer is kind of like one of those, like, offer it up. It's almost like a Catholic slogan. But it's important to bring this all to prayer, because ultimately God is what our heart longs for. God is love, and he is constantly loving us, even in times where we're frustrated, even in times where nothing makes sense and we don't understand where we fit in the cosmos. We do fit in the divine plan, necessarily, because God loves us. So it's important to, in all of these things, bring it up in a spirit of prayer and to offer it to the Lord and to have a conversation with the Lord about these things. I think that another thing that we can do is to be honest about what we're really feeling and to get it out in some way. I think it's important to talk to other people, whether it's a spouse, a boyfriend, girlfriend, a trusted friend, somebody who's involved with the situation and might be able to offer an alternate perspective, or even just to write it out in a journal format. And don't worry about, if you're going to write it out, don't worry about it all making sense and being pretty and proper. Just get it out. And I mean, I think the same thing goes with talking to a friend as well. If you have a close friend that you can talk to, don't worry about trying to word things perfectly. Like, I think at some point it makes sense, and it's a little bit better to talk things out before you've had a chance to sort of massage it and get the messaging correct. Like, this isn't a PR campaign that you're doing. It's really talking about things that are difficult, things that we are frustrated about, and things that are really gnawing at our soul. And I think that when we're talking about being honest about what we're feeling, I think that that's a general disposition to not try to deceive ourselves. And like I said, in today's day and age, it's very easy to accept information that fits our narrative or our preferred way of thinking. And it's very easy to ignore things that we might not like, or things that we might find objectionable or something like that. Things that our families or our friends might not approve of. But I think it's important to bring those forward with honesty. Beyond this, I think it's important to focus on what we can do. I think that there's so much information that we're subjected to, so much different stuff in the world today that we now have access to, that a lot of times that feeling of emptiness or frustration can kind of come just from the fact that we are putting too much responsibility on ourselves, or we are thinking about too many things that don't pertain to us. I think that it's a great virtue to be able to separate things that truly pertain to us and our state in life from things that don't pertain to us or don't pertain to our state in life. And even beyond that, there might be things that pertain to us that we just can't do anything about. I mean, I think that at that point, the question that we need to be asking ourselves isn't about these things that we can't do anything about. It's to ask ourselves, okay, what can we do about this? What do I have control over? You know, does this mean that, you know, I'm angry about work? Does this mean that I need to look for other jobs? Or does it mean that I need to have an honest conversation with my boss about the amount of overtime that I'm working on? You know, that's something that we can do. It's not good to just stew on things or rage about the system or something like that. That's probably not going to really contribute to anything. So it's important to focus on what we can do. And then finally, to do it. I think that there's a lot of tendency in my life, at least, that I've noticed to think about these things, think about the steps that are active, and then, you know, maybe the end of the day rolls around and I'm just tired and it's easier to, you know, scroll through Facebook and eat some Cheetos or something like that. But it's important to, once we've thought through things and we've talked to other people, we've gotten different vantage points on the situation, and we really, you know, start to make a leap forward in terms of how we're thinking about this, it's important to stop thinking about it at some point and just do it. And ultimately, we don't need to worry that much about what happens about things, because if we're following this sort of methodology where we've done everything in a spirit of prayer and we are being honest and we are talking to people, learning what we need to learn, thinking things through in a spiritual way and in a physical way, and gaining every vantage point that we possibly can as we're thinking through things with people, we don't have much to fear. So, all in all, I think it's important not only to think honestly, to talk about it with other people, focus on things we can do and do it, but to keep that all in a spirit of prayer. And as I said before, God loves us immensely. So when we bring all of this to him in a spirit of prayer, God isn't sitting there trying to make things as inscrutable as possible. He's not trying to present us with some quagmire that we can't find a way out of. He's there to help us, and his love is always there, present to us. And I think if we do all of these things, we'll do well in avoiding bitterness and in really be able to move forward in the love of God in the way that he asks us to, with courage, with prudence, and with virtue. Until next time, stay in the state of grace, and God bless, friends.